Before I describe how to install Apache, MySQL, and PHP on your development system, I'll take a few moments to review how these software products work together to support a web application. Web-based applications are sometimes known as multi-tier applications. That's because they're built with multiple software products or multiple tiers. There are four major tiers in a web application: the client, the web tier, the business tier, and the data tier. The client is a web browser. The browser software is installed on your local system, whether that's a desktop or a laptop computer, or a mobile device such as a smartphone or a tablet. The browser sends requests to the server, and then receives and renders HTML, images, and cascading style sheets. All modern web browsers can execute client-side code such as HTML markup and JavaScript code. And in many cases, they can run applets in plugins such as Flash Player, Silverlight, or Java. All the other tiers of a web application go into the server environment, and taken together, they're known as the server stack. There are three server tiers. The web tier is the HTTP server. In an AMP stack, that's Apache, but in a Windows environment, it can be replaced with Internet Information Services, or IIS. The HTTP server receives requests from the client and returns responses. When it receives a request for an executable script, the HTTP server can be configured to dispatch that request to the business tier, an application server. The most popular two application servers these days are PHP and ASP.NET. PHP is typically used with Apache, but can also be used with IIS, while ASP.NET is almost always a part of an IIS Windows environment. And then the fourth tier is the database server. The most popular database servers are MySQL, SQL Server, and Oracle, but there are a number of other popular products as well. When you're working with an AMP stack, these are the three products you're working with: Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And they're all designed to talk to each other. Here's how they work together at runtime. You're always starting with the browser, which makes the request. The request is sent to the Apache HTTP server. If the request is for a simple static file, like an HTML file or a graphical file, the Apache HTTP server can handle that on its own. But when it receives a request for a PHP file, it dispatches or forwards that request to the PHP server. The PHP server interprets the script and executes it. Along the way, it might need to communicate with the MySQL database server, and if so, it sends the request as a query statement. And the MySQL server returns a response to PHP. Then PHP forms a response for Apache and sends it back, and Apache sends the response back to the browser. In a multi-tier environment, most of the components don't know about each other's existence. The browser, for example, doesn't know about PHP. It only knows that it's made a request for HTML content, and that's what it receives. And Apache doesn't know about the database server. So if you need to replace the server later on with another component, such as SQL Server or Oracle, only one component, PHP, needs to be directly affected. In a production environment, the database server is frequently installed on a different computer than the system that hosts Apache and PHP. But when you're developing locally, all of these components typically are installed on your own machine. And that's what this course will focus on: local installations of Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Most web application developers install Apache, MySQL, and PHP on their local development systems so they can develop and test their code before uploading it to a production server. There are a number of ways of doing this, and which strategy you select depends on what's most important to you. If you want the most control over your environment, you might want to use individual components. On Windows, that means you'll download individual components from each vendor. Apache from the Apache Foundation, PHP from the PHP website, and MySQL from MySQL.com. On Mac OS X, Apache and PHP are already included. You just need to know how to start up Apache and how to activate PHP. You'll still get MySQL, though, from MySQL.com. And on Linux, you can download everything with a command line interface called apt-get, a package manager. You'll be able to download and install everything with just a few commands. I'll show you all these individual component strategies on all three operating systems in this course. But if you want to get started more quickly, or just want more ease of use, you might consider one of the many software bundles that are available that include Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Here are some of the benefits of each of these bundles. WAMP Server on Windows is one of the most popular bundles. It includes everything you need to get started, and it installs quickly and easily. MAMP is available for both Mac and Windows, as is XAMPP. XAMPP is actually available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, as is Bitnami. If you're just looking for the fastest, most foolproof installations, I recommend WAMP Server or MAMP on Windows. Or on OS X, MAMP again. In both cases, the installations are very simple with not that many options, and there aren't too many ways to go wrong. If you're looking for more complete bundles with more software than just Apache, MySQL, and PHP, you might consider XAMPP, which includes an FTP server component, and the Windows version even includes an email server. Or if you want to work with some of the popular MVC frameworks for PHP, such as Zend Framework or Cake PHP, you might select Bitnami. One of the things you always have to worry about is port management. Apache and MySQL listen on ports, numeric values. And the basic rule is that each port can only be used by one software component at a time. MAMP can help you manage this on both Mac and Windows. It lets you easily switch back and forth between the standard ports for Apache and MySQL and alternative ports. And another thing to know is that Bitnami on Mac typically uses port 8080 for Apache, unless you follow certain steps to install it as the root user. Before you install a new bundle, you should typically uninstall or deactivate all of your other Apache and MySQL installations. And that's because of this port management rule. There can only be one software product listening on each port at a time. So start with a clean system. This course covers a lot of strategies, but the goal shouldn't be to install all of them. Choose the one that works for you, or if you're watching a particular lynda.com course and the instructor is using a particular AMP stack and you want to follow along, uninstall or deactivate all the other AMP stacks, then install the one that you want. You just need to make sure nothing else is listening on these standard ports, port 80 or 3306. I show how to detect port conflicts for both Mac and Windows in the last chapter of this course. And I also provide some other troubleshooting tips. So choose the bundle you want or the individual components you want. Start with a clean system and then follow through the steps for the installation. If you have trouble, if certain server components, for example, won't start up, check and make sure that you don't have any other software products listening on those ports, and then try the installation again.